Thank you. There was quite a bit of talk about teaming and how we had not followed all the team rules and stuff, but actually we did. We just sat down because of peer pressure. But one of the things that we decided was that my colleagues, Sharma, Alexander, and Larry, did all the thinking. So therefore, they decided that I should do all the talking. So that's how we decided to split our teams. So today we are going to talk about this idea of the 3 C's of engineering reasoning, or how not to get a C in your engineering reasoning class. So let's get started. So this is my elevator pitch. Of course, I'm fond of the Blues Brothers. But the big idea is the following. There are 3 main pieces to engineering education. If you think about what we teach, we start out with talking about the tools for reasoning. That's our calculus classes and physics and all of that. Then our middle, the valley of death, is the engineering reasoning process. And then we have the engineering design process. So we decided to focus on the engineering reasoning process and talk about this idea which we refer to as the 3 C's, the context to concept to context, improving the engineering reasoning process. So the idea is to start out with a context that we propose and have invite the students to actually reason about it. Then provide them with feedback about their reasoning, follow it up with a formalization of the knowledge, and then invite them to discover a new everyday context in which this concept can be applied. So that's the basic idea of this process of cycling through it. That's what we decided to talk about. So why do we care about this? So let's see if this thing works.
We are the premier engineering and science institution in the world.
Do you think you light a bulb with a battery and wire? Do you think you could light a bulb with a battery and wire?
Yeah. Light a bulb with a battery and a wire. Maybe. Yes.
All right.
Definitely.
Do you think you can light a bulb with a battery and a wire?
Battery and wire? Well, yes, why not?
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, can you do that?
The interesting part about the batteries and bulbs question is that people always predict that they can do it. Students say, of course I can do this.
Any hints I should have here?
Teachers say, of course my students can do this.
Ow! Do you know why that didn't work?
I have no idea.
Battery could be dead, the bulb could be bad, I'm hooking it up totally incorrectly. I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer.
So you will notice that they did not ask the faculty. The answers would have been much worse, is what I think. But the bottom line is, we are dealing with a situation in which students have this illusion of knowledge. That is, they think they know how things work, but they don't. And a good example with the elevator pitch is that if you ask them in the elevator, how does this elevator work? They would not know. And in fact, they might think they might know, but it's not true. So this is actually a very common situation, and that's one of the things that we are trying to deal with. And the part of the reason is that students need greater exposure to engineering context. So I have done this. I was in Qatar for a year. We have a branch campus there, and I was teaching students there, engineering. 30% of the students are female in Qatar, and they come fully, with all I could see was their eyes, maybe. It was very difficult to do exams because I didn't know who it was. I got really good at reading shoes. So I could say, oh, red shoe, yeah, I know her. That's high heels, yeah, okay, I got it. Prada, whatever. So, but the deal was, actually I had a big problem. because they did not know the difference between a screw and a bolt. And here I was teaching statics and dynamics, and I was saying bolt these things together, and for them everything was nil. That has to do with the fact that they were not exposed to the engineering context. So that's what got us thinking about this, along with my friends here. And so we started looking at this idea of saying that, before we talk about conceptual understanding and reasoning and all of this, first we have to present them with a reasonable context in which they can do it. And then invite them to figure out how this thing works, or what are the conceptual principles behind the ideas. And then use that, and that's where the students self-test by creating a new context in which the same principle would work. So this is the 3C cycle. So our idea was to create a database of engineering contexts, and this is quite different from an idea that we were talking about, which is a concept inventory. We are talking about a context inventory now. So this is a different idea on that. And the basic thing is that the concepts would be student generated, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And we are hoping that we can host it in the FOEE website as a way for students to say, if one of your ideas is selected, it will be out there on the National Academy of Engineering website for others to use. And we have some examples where we can show that it is widely used. So I'll talk about that also. And then, so it starts out with instructor assigning an engineering context to a team of students. And then the students work in groups to create your own explanation for the context. Feedback from instructors on context, peer-to-peer mentoring, and we had this idea that there are many universities, so we could do a MOOC based on the different universities as opposed to the general public. So because many people, if it's fluid mechanics, every semester we are offering it. So maybe a person from Georgia Tech can help Texas A&M, vice versa, so on and so forth. We will not ask for help from UT. That's not done. So the idea is the student self-testing, test your explanation by finding a new context. And if this is accepted, then it's added to the database. I'm going to show one example of this. And of course, this is instructor-led context, and not surprisingly, it's boring, because that's all I could find. And this is very Texan. If you go to Texas or Oklahoma or something like that, you'll see lots of it. So this is a very simple pump jet. So it's extracting oil from the ground, and the question is, how does this work? And you can see that there's a big, the back of it has a huge counterweight. Why is there a counterweight? And then I can show you what the final result of the reasoning by students came up with. They actually created their own version of the pump jet with the forces marked on that. Can you see that black arrow is the acceleration of the center of mass, and you can see how the acceleration changes as it goes around in a circle. And you can see the jerky motion because it did not have a counterweight. So this is an example where you can say, okay, I realized, okay, what's the purpose of a counterweight here? Because if I want to mimic the motion, I got to do that. So this is an example of the first step of the process where I start with a context and land up with a concept. And then this is student-generated context. This is actually from my colleague Alexander at Georgia Tech. And just to get you an idea, this was done by students as part of his fluid mechanics class, the concept to context idea. And this has more than 500,000 hits. And it's a very nice thing. And you can see it's a very simply explained, just give it a couple of seconds. So this is what the students...
is a relationship between the shearing force acting on a fluid and the rate at which the fluid's flow accelerates. It is normally denoted by the Greek letter mu. In other words, viscosity is how thick the fluid is or how runny it is. The water on the left has a lower viscosity than the fluid on the right. This can be visualized by the fact that the water flows more freely than the fluid on the right. As you can see, the water deforms more readily than the fluid on the left on this vibrating table. A Newtonian fluid has a constant viscosity, whereas a non-Newtonian fluid has a variable viscosity. In this case, we're using a shear thickening fluid, which is a fluid that has an inverse relationship between the shearing force and the shear rate. This means that as the force acting on the fluid increases, the shear rate decreases. Therefore, the fluid appears to thicken as it is subjected to a force. In this video, we'll be using oobleck, which is comprised of cornstarch and water, as our shear thickening fluid. We will be exploring its reactions to various forces along with silly putty and water. See how the wrench sinks into the oobleck compared to the water. Observe carefully as the wrench hits the surface of the oobleck. The oobleck acts like a solid at first because of the high shearing stress applied from the impact, but it then sinks because the gravitational force of the wrench is much lower than the impact force. Silly putty is another non-Newtonian fluid. This one, however, requires a minimum shearing stress before it starts to flow. Here's a wrench hitting silly putty. Notice the force of the wrench is not enough to deform it. See how the silly putty forms a fraction in the slow motion video because it is a non-Newtonian viscoelastic shear thickening fluid. Notice how the oblique resists the change in shape during the initial punch, but then starts deforming like a liquid right after. If you thought that was cool, watch the next clips. Now we will subject the oblique to a 0.2 gram plastic BB shot from a propane-powered pistol. Observe the splintering of the oblique upon impact of the BB and how it reintegrates into the rest of the fluid. See how the water does not stop the BB nearly as much as the oblique.
Right, so.
See how the BB punctures the paper normally. Now watch as the silly putty is shot and how it prevents the BB from puncturing the paper.
And it's at an angle, so the student knows not to fire at himself.
Thanks for watching.
So this is an example of what students could do if we went through this process as to what they were doing, because the other video is an old one, and you can see that's really what our 3 C's for engineering reasoning is all about. And basic idea for us on the impact in engineering education is to go from pattern matching to thinking about principles. And this is one of the things that we know anytime student comes, the reason why they keep saying the exam looks different from the homework. I mean, we think it's because it appears different. They mean literally it looks different. The homework is a smaller page. You know what I mean? They're literal about the pattern matching aspects. And what we are talking about is to get them away from a superficial pattern recognition to deeper principle recognition. And this idea of abstraction, embodiment, and connectivity, and how to think through analogies. That's what our project would be about. Thank you. Questions?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I want to thank your group and I want to thank you for that video because I think so often, and this is back to Lisa's comment about when you do course design, if you're thinking about where you want your students to go before you start, not just what concept in the textbook you want, but you're thinking about what deeper principle recognition do I want, where I want them to be, then you start coming up with these more exciting homework. We can be like humanities and say make a film.
Yeah, right.
You know, we can do that.
Right.
And I want to thank your group for bringing it
Right,
up.
and that's Alexander. The boring stuff is mine. The interesting stuff is his. Anything else? I can't see. Yeah.
Do you constrain the students in terms of what they should work with, or do you leave it open-ended? And the reason I ask that is I could imagine trying to evaluate what comes in. And students might be putting 2 things together, and you're looking at it, you don't even understand phenomenologically what's going on. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, I understand everything. No, jokes apart. Alexander can answer this particular one for what you're doing in your class. Yeah, here. Oops, I don't know whether it works. But or you can stand up.
I actually tried different things. I did it maybe 4, 5, 6 times, and I think the less constraint you put on a student, the better result, right? They're kind of much more open to what they want to do, and they are actually very careful what they say and what they do because they know it will be on YouTube and after they graduate too, right? So they try to be, work.
So you don't have any examples of students putting things together that you never have imagined, and then you look at the result, and the behavior just confuses you as well.
Sometimes, I mean, there's like 60 videos now, you can watch them. Some of them are confusing indeed, but what we do actually in the end, I don't evaluate it. They said it's kind of self-evaluated. So we screen them in the class, and then the students select their best video. And that's guys who get the benefits of this project, right? So that's what they think. It's kind of popularity contest, but yeah.
I think I agree.
So really interesting and inspiring work. I'm wondering if you thought about how this fits into the cold learning cycle, which may be an idea you know about, and it's kind of just for me in the back of my head with a lot of this. How can we bring in some more of the learning sciences to see how our intuition and our experiences in the classroom actually fit into learning theory? And I'm not sure. I think this is more of a comment of how do we all get smarter about that to see that's a tool to actually look at improvements too. So cold learning cycle has a lot of these elements, and you're enacting it, and it's great.
Okay. Any comments from? Thank you.